This episode of Tales from Atlantis is brought to you by Atlantis Premium. Don't you just hate having your favorite podcast interrupted by ads like this? Well, dear listener, you're in luck. Because starting at just $3 a month, you can support independent Chicano media and receive ad-free episodes, premium episodes, bonus content, and access to our Discord server. Just visit talesfromatlantis.com and click Go Premium, or follow the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
You must excuse me. I've grown quite weary.
This hasn't been easy, I know. But you've learned a lesson. A lesson in honesty. Honesty to yourself and honesty to others. That lesson will stand you in good stead all your life.
I think we've all learned a good lesson. I've always heard that honesty is the best policy. Now I'm catching on to why that's so, and why that's so, and why that's so, and why.
Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to yet another episode of Tales from Atlantis. I am your host, Kurly Tlapoyawa, and for today's episode, we're going to switch things up a little bit and take a look into the past. You see, before the Tales from Atlantis podcast, I tried to get an earlier podcast started, but with little success because, well, to be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing at the time in terms of properly promoting a successful podcast. And as a result, I wound up with some pretty cool interviews that unfortunately nobody ever heard. So today I'm going to try to rectify that a bit by featuring one of these older interviews that I conducted with Benjamin Radford from the Skeptical Inquirer. And the content crosses over really well with the subject matter that we touch on here at the Tales from Atlantis podcast. You see, we talk about the Nazca Lines in Peru. We talk about the European esoteric and occultist origins of some allegedly Maya ancestral knowledge. And we touch on the subject of the infamous Chupacabra, which, incidentally, Ben is an expert on. In fact, I think he is the world's foremost expert on that very subject. So with that being said, here we go with this older interview. I hope you enjoy it. And until next time, Timo Itase. What up, everybody? This is Kurly Tlapoyawa, a.k.a. the Hardcore Archaeologist, and we are broadcasting once again from Chicano Studios in downtown Albuquerque. Joining me tonight is my friend and fellow skeptic, Benjamin Radford. Ben Radford is deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine and a research fellow with the nonprofit educational organization, the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. His colleagues there include Bill Nye and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Name dropper. He has written thousands of articles on a wide variety of topics, including urban legends, mysterious phenomena, critical thinking, and media literacy. He is author, co-author, or contributor to over 20 books, and has won awards for his books, films, and podcasts. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend, Ben Radford.
Hey, here I am, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. It's good to see you.
You too, man. You know, we've known each other for a long ass time.
We have.
I can't remember the exact first time that we met, but it's been like at least 8 years.
It's been a
maybe
while.
10.
Yeah.
It's
a long time.
I did one of your I took one of your stuntman courses.
That's right.
Damn near killed me, man. I'm not too proud to say it, but I was like, shit, man. I did it, and then I'm just like, I was not feeling well. I'm like, I'm ibuprofen. I'm taking a hot bath. And I'm like, man, he does this all the time. I'm not like, you know, I'm not in bad shape, but man, hardcore. So I get, and you know, the thing is, like, I've always totally respected like stuntmen, and I always wanted to be a stuntman until I realized just how hard it was.
It can hurt.
I have nothing but love and respect for the profession.
Cool.
So
likewise, sir. I have a great deal of respect for what you do. I'm a big fan of the magazine. You know, that and Skeptic are two of my favorite magazines. I want to write for Skeptical Inquirer. I just don't ever seem to have the time to get something ready for it. But
hey, man, send me something. I'll be happy to look at it. We love your stuff.
There's a lot of ideas floating around in my head. So you just got back from Peru.
No, I was actually in Peru a while ago. I actually got back from the Caribbean. I was doing a long. I was basically the guest speaker on a Caribbean cruise. I went to a couple different islands, did a couple investigations there. But I was in Peru a few years back, looking into the Nazca Lines. Actually, I was there for a skeptical conference.
Well, was the Nazca Lines part of the conference?
It was not. I was going. I've traveled to Latin America pretty often. It's one of my favorite places because I speak Spanish, not great, but certainly passable. And so I'd actually been to Peru a couple times. Most recently was for the Skeptics Congress. And I figured, well, as long as we're there, let's go check it out. So I'd been to Machu Picchu, and Chan Chan and some of the other places, but I had never been to the Nazca Lines. And so I figured, since me and Joe Nickel were there, my colleague at CFI, and of course also a columnist for Skeptical Inquirer, I was like, hey, let's go check it out. And so we did that. We also looked at the Ica stones, the stones that have the
aliens.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like they're like, oh, could this be a dinosaur? Like, yeah.
Well,
we'll call it that.
Wasn't the story like some guy was there offering to pay money for these stones? So like the locals were like, oh shit, this white dude is fucking paying us.
It's like, all right. Yeah, that's basically the story. I mean, this years ago, so somebody was carving these things into some rocks, and just these cool little designs, and then they showed it to somebody down there, a white guy who didn't know jack shit. He's like, wow. Can you find me more of these? Can you dig these up from ancient tombs? He's like, yeah, my cousin Juan can get you lots of those. Hold on.
Yeah, I bet.
And so he's bringing them by the cartload.
Like it became like a cottage industry.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
and taking advantage of this idiot foreigner with a lot of money.
Right, he's like, oh wow, this is I'm on the edge of some cutting edge thing. He's like, you're being suckered, dude.
Yeah. Well, what freaks me out though, I mean, I guess I shouldn't be freaked out by it. I should expect it by now. Is those stones, photos of those stones, show up on my feed, I would have to say, and I'm not even bullshitting, like 3 or 4 times a week.
Really?
By New Age indigenous enthusiasts that are really, really caught up in just this New Agey, reinterpretation of indigenous history, this pseudo-history. And so I see it all the time. They'll be like, well, how if science is wrong because look, man lived with dinosaurs.
Boom, proof.
Yeah.
Mic drop.
Checkmate, bitches. Fucking scientists.
Well, what's bizarre to me is that, in the skeptical world, this is old news. I mean, this is like as stale as the Bermuda Triangle. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is, there hasn't been anything on the Ica stones in forever, and so to like skeptics who do this, as a career, it's like, yeah, that was debunked like long ago. But in our skeptical bubble, it's sometimes easy to forget that people like you and people who aren't skeptical, they just like, oh look, they're rediscovering this shit, as if it's like, well, here's a new thing. It's like, no, my child, sit down. This is not new.
Well,
we'll be back after a quick break.
Have you picked up your Mexica calendar for the year 12 Flint? Or how about a paperback copy of The Four Disagreements? Just visit talesfromastlantis.com for all the latest merchandise and show some love for your favorite podcast. That's talesfromastlantis.com for all the latest merchandise. Now, back to the show.
It's this proclivity to attach ourselves to things that we see as like ancient knowledge or hidden knowledge, that we have this special access to things that nobody else knows about, and it somehow makes us special, and we like that feeling. I think people are drawn to that. I think that's what draws people just magical thinking, and not having a skeptical, or if they're skeptical about the wrong shit.
Right.
Like, I literally...
We call those skeptics.
Yeah. Well, I just saw an argument, an honest to God. Yeah, I don't believe in God, but...
Honest to lowercase g God.
Yeah. Argument about the flat earth on my Facebook page.
Right, in 2017.
Yeah. And
you expect that in like 1750.
Yeah, right? But this one guy, he's like, no, man, you just don't understand the way I understand. And did you know that NASA means to deceive in ancient Hebrew? And I'm like, are you sure about that? Because I'm not sure about that. But even if it is true, come on. But what's funny is they all must be getting their information from the exact same source, because and I've been lucky. I've only actually ever interacted with 3 human beings that think the earth is flat, but they all use the same arguments. They all say, well, the Bible says that it was, airplane pilots already know this, man. Otherwise they would have to fly with the tips of their planes pointed down. And I'm like, you really don't understand how things work, dude.
Right. You don't have a clue. You just don't have a clue. Well, it's, part of it is it's sort of, I would contrast that to, the way that science works. I mean, science, as you know, operates on precedent, and it operates on established knowledge. And what these people miss is that in order to understand something, you need to make an effort to research it. This sounds crazy. Find actual experts.
Yeah, beyond YouTube videos.
Yeah, not just
and blogs that already,
right,
repeat your narrative.
And Alex Jones, yeah, and so what this is that to them it's this cutting edge thing. It's like, well, you're just part of the establishment.
Yeah,
you don't understand.
Well, something that's really unfortunate that I've seen is this reaction to intellectualism. This anti-intellectualism that's going on, and especially in the indigenous communities, I get called a sellout. I get called all kinds of names because I went back to school and, became a scientist and work as an archaeologist. And people are like, well, that's the white man's science. And I'm like, well, science is like...
It's kind of everyone's science.
Yeah,
really.
It's kind of everybody's. It doesn't belong to one specific group. And it's a method. It's not an ideology. So,
exactly.
We need to let go of this fear of science. But what I'm seeing a lot, and I mean, come on. It's like you said, it's 2017. We have people that believe in the flat earth. We have people that believe in the ecostones. We have people believe that we never went to the moon. And it doesn't matter how many times these things get debunked. I think you're always going to have people that believe in it just because they want to believe in it. They live in this bubble, this reality that they've constructed for themselves that they're not willing to poke their heads outside of.
Well, part of it is that it's one skepticism we call the rubber duck syndrome. It's basically old wine in new bottles. And what you find is that a lot of times, a lot of these so-called new ideas, these so-called cutting edge ideas, if you actually take some time to do some research into it, these ideas circulated in the 1870s, in the 1930s. I mean, there's nothing new about them at all. They're just old wine in new bottles, and they're repackaged as some sort of mystical. And it just, and again, it goes back to just people. The problem isn't just that they don't do the research; it's that they don't even realize they should do the research. To them, it's all new, and well, hey, this guy on YouTube said this, and like, yeah, I know. There's a whole body of knowledge here. Saying like every now and then I have someone's like, oh well, have you looked at the studies about psychic abilities and PK? I'm like, yeah, actually I have. Yeah, what about it? Like, oh. Well, and then they start to throw something out there, and like look into it. There's a robust history of people who have spent time looking for ghosts. People have spent time trying to prove psychoconnectability with random number generators, the pair program, and these other things. Whereas like it's the data's there. It's not as if the reason that scientists reject this is not because no one's looked at it. The reason they reject it is because they have looked at it, and it's bullshit.
And there's no evidence. I mean, wasn't Houdini one of the big guys that was really out to debunk and challenge the psychic phenomena claims?
He absolutely was. I mean, and Houdini is a perfect example of an early skeptic. He died in 1926, but from the 1880s onward, he was one of the most prominent debunkers, and partly because of his background in magic. And of course, there's a long history of skeptics in magic. James Randi, Ray Hyman, other people like that, who part of the value is in knowing how people are fooled. Because that's what magicians do. That's literally what they do. Is they think of ways to fool you, and when you spend your time looking at ways to fool you, you can more easily identify the ways that other people are fooled. And so Houdini, he didn't start out as a skeptic necessarily or debunker. He got disgusted with the spiritualists of the day, with the capital S spiritualist movement, certainly around that time. And it was very, very popular, starting with Kate and Maggie Fox in Hydesville, New York, and they had this series of raps that they claimed were from a murdered peddler, and that sort of launched a whole basically a religion called spiritualism, which was very, very popular in the 1800s and still exists in a couple places today. Anyway, it was later proven to be a hoax. They admitted they had lied, but people were like, "Well, don't care. Whatever, we're still..." Anyway, so Houdini saw the vast number of people that are being scammed by people who are doing transparent magic tricks. And he's like, this is bullshit. It's like, I know that you're lying because I can do that. And so he set out to prove, to prove that these people were hoaxing, which of course they were. And so, Houdini was one of the original skeptics, certainly, of that era.
So when you said that you went to take a look at the Ica stones, did you get to hold any of the Ica stones?
I held my stones, man. I held as many stones as I could. See, here's the situation. So I was I was with Joe Nickel, another research fellow at CFI, and Joe doesn't speak any Spanish, and my Spanish is okay. I wouldn't call it good, but it's okay, certainly enough to get by on. But Joe didn't speak any Spanish, and so he was sort of relying on me to translate and stuff, which is fine. But we went to go see Nazca, and we did a flight and saw the drawings, and we didn't really do much on the ground research because there's not really much you can do like on the ground because you're not allowed to actually go out on the fields, which of course is good. But anyway, we flew over it. We did some stuff there, and then we went to nearby Ica, which actually has a good brewery. A lot of people don't realize. Nice. Yeah, here's the thing: is that in a lot of the small Peruvian towns, for example, Trujillo, each of the local towns, even if it's a tiny one, has their own beer. Basically, so there's Trujillo beer. Anyway, so I was like sampling, like, okay, let's get to Ica now, right? By the time I was at Ica, I was pretty plastered, but I calmed down. So we tracked down where the Ica stones were, and it was weird because I don't know what I was expecting, but I thought maybe like in a museum, but then I'm like, well, but it's bullshit. I'm glad they're not in a museum because that will legitimize the bullshit. I mean, it's pretty...
Unless they were put into context.
Right, yeah, sure. So anyway, I tracked down where the Ica stones were, and it was like this nondescript, it was like, 435 Plaza de Armas or whatever, and just so you knock on this like big wooden door like you'd see in some Alamo movie, and we had to wait and make arrangements. It was this whole big production, and eventually went in there, and they opened up the door. We were led into a room that was probably maybe 10 feet by maybe 30 or 40 feet, and just all around were stones, just like shelves and shelves, and just and some of them were boulders, some of them as big as basketballs, and like not as big as a small car, but like 3 feet in diameter, and other ones were a lot smaller. Anyway, they're just all over the place. And so I got some photos. I can send them to you. You can use them on the thing. But it was just interesting seeing all these things. And the woman that ran it, we paid a little fee or whatever, and it wasn't like an official museum. It was just sort of these are the Ica stones. But it was so clear that these are hoaxes and fakes. I mean, just like it was interesting from a historical point of view to actually see the Ica stones and touch them, and like. But on the other hand, I'm like, in a way, this is historically significant just from a skeptical point of view. But in a way, it's like, I could do this. Like if you give me a rock and a nail and half an hour, and I can do this. And the idea that this would fool somebody who was blinded by this vision that they were uncovering some hidden, connection to the prehistoric past was bizarre.
Well, you just wanted to believe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the people that are posting them to this very freaking day just really want something to believe in, and for whatever reason, this is their thing. With the Nazca lines. So I've always heard. I've never been there, but I always hear that there's no way that you could see these things unless you were from, like flying over it.
Right.
That it's physically impossible. But I've also heard from people say, well, no, you could, if you stood here on the side of this mountain, you could just look down and see them perfectly fine. I've never been there. What's the story there?
Yeah, so that's, when you look at the mythologies that have emerged over Nazca, and let me just preface this by saying I'm not an expert on Nazca. I've been there, I did some research, but I'm certainly the world's top expert. But I've been there, I've done some research on it. So if I get a glitch or two wrong, but basically, a lot of the pseudo history that's emerged out of Nazca is the result of course, von Daniken. Eric von Daniken, who has his book Chariot of the Gods, and his basic thesis is that anybody basically older than him is too stupid to build a pyramid.
Yeah.
Or carve rocks.
Yeah.
Or lines in the desert, right? And so his racist thesis is that ancient Americans or Egyptians or else didn't have the knowledge of the technology to for example, build Mesoamericans, for example, and pyramids. And the problem is that if you look at pyramids, I mean, pyramids are the ultimate stable shape. Like if there are any structures, if say 2,000 years ago, you try to do a bunch of different shapes for things that would like last a long time, the only one that would last a long time would be the pyramid, because they're inherently stable. So the reason these things lasted so long is because they were intentionally created to last that long, right? So for all we know, they had these huge pillars that, of course, crumbled after a short time. So it's this bizarre backward thinking. And von Daniken's still alive.
He is.
Yeah, it's the
I never would have thought that.
Well, I got an email from him. I got an email from it was one of his PR people, and it was bizarre because this was like a year or two ago, and it's like, oh, von Daniken still and I wrote back to the PR guy. I'm like, is he still alive? I thought that bullshit was discredited a long time ago. And of course, the guy never wrote back. But anyway, so yeah, he still. In fact, he tried to do a sort of a pseudo-scientific Disneyland. He had this idea for this theme park that he was going to do in Europe, I think in Switzerland or something, that was going to be dedicated to his crank ideas. It never got anywhere, of course. But anyway, I'm going off the track. So the so-called mystery surrounding the Nazca lines, many of them emerged in the context of like, well, it's weird. I couldn't do it.
Ancient aliens.
Must be aliens, right? Exactly. So, and one of the, exactly as you mentioned, one of the claims that floats around is that the only way that these things could have been seen is from above. And of course, if that's true, let me emphasize, if that's true, then that does raise a legitimate question like, well, why would you design something that you can't appreciate, you can't see? I mean, it's like, I guess it would almost be like, if you did a self-tattoo on your own back and there were no mirrors, mm-hmm. like why would you do that? Because you can't. There's literally no way anybody could see it. So there's a certain sort of kind of logic to it. The problem is that you can, in fact, see many of the designs. There's hundreds of designs there. Most of them are some of the best ones are animals. So there's a spider, and there's a bird, and there's a monkey.
The monkey. The monkey's the most famous one.
Monkey's awesome.
Yeah, the monkey's awesome.
But there's lots of smaller ones. There's about 70 ones that are animals. There's also shapes and designs and flowers, and I mean there's a wide variety of stuff. And not all of them can be seen anyway. There's a mountain nearby. It's not a tall mountain, but it's definitely a mountain, and it's definitely high enough that you could see the designs. So again, the premise that you can't see the designs from there is flat out wrong. You can see the designs. And again, it's one of the things where part of the problem is that there's all this misinformation out there, right? And so if you don't know that, because as you said, you look online, in one place it says you can't see the designs from the Nazca Plains. You look at another blog, it says, well, of course you can. Unless you go there, or I mean, you could. I mean, these days there's Wikipedia, which is probably slightly more accurate than not. But the point is that for people who don't bother to do any research, it's sort of 6 of one, half dozen the other. And so that's what you found is that the designs are visible. At least some of the designs are visible from the Nazca Plains. And when the real question is why they were made. It's not really when they were made, because we have stakes. They found stakes. They carbon dated, and it dates right back to the Nazca culture, which is about 200 BC to 600 BC. Or excuse me, 200 BC to about 600 AD. So it dates right exactly to when they would be there. And near a lot of the designs, there are smaller layouts of that design, which of course you don't see in the big aerial photographs, right? So and that sort of gives us a clue in terms of how they made them, because they were laid out. We can tell they were laid out ahead of time.
They did like artist studies prior to executing the actual thing.
So it's not like this is all blank slate. It's like we know there is clear evidence that they the Nazca Indians, not aliens, for example. Because why would aliens need to do that, right? If it's aliens, you just shoot your lasers downstairs. And anyway, so again, the real question isn't who made them, despite von Daniken's bullshit, because the Nazca Indians made them, and there's no reason to doubt that. And there's no real question as to how they were made. We don't have photographs, but we have a pretty good idea of how they were done, and it's through a grid system. Right, so as an artist, you know this, right? You can design something out there, and then you just scale it up. Yeah, and it's not going to be perfect, but the designs aren't perfect. I mean, they are what they are. Yeah. Sometimes they're a little crooked here or there, and that's to be expected. So the real question is why they were made, and at the end of the day, I mean that's sort of that basic. I mean, the question why is probably the ultimate question, right? It's why are we here, right? Why is something done?
Yeah, why is anything done?
Exactly, and it's the most difficult question to answer, right? In anything, if there's a murder or there's some event, right? Anything that happens in the real world, one of the most difficult questions is why. It's pretty easy to determine where and when, and sometimes how and who, but why is causation. Why is more speculative. Why is it's inherently conjecture. It's and not that you can't have an answer to it, but it's ultimately a difficult. It's the most difficult question to answer of the four H's and W, whatever, 4 H's. I'm drunk, but anyway, so and we see the same thing with Stonehenge, right? Why did they build it? Why did they design Stonehenge in that way? Well, probably astronomical. There's other reasons. The question how they did it is not that hard to find. Also, the stones at Rapa Nui, the iconic Easter Island stuff. So it's not surprising that the big why did they do this, right? And so one of the theories that von Daniken proposed, which just to preface is bullshit, was that they were landing strips. Not the kind of landing ship you're thinking of, but he's like, there's these big lines. Maybe the spacecraft needed to, because apparently spacecraft need to land. I mean, do they need to come in a runway? Because those really what? Because they can't just hover. I don't know. Anyway, so part of the idea was that maybe these are like some sort of landing strips out there. Well. First of all, why would you need to do that? Second of all, the ground is much too soft for that. If you've been out to the Atacama Desert and the Nazca Lines, when you walk around, of course, you're not allowed to walk on the lines, but you're in the desert, so you're seeing some of it. There's sort of the stones have a varnish because they've been baked under the sun for millennia, and so you have one side of rocks has varnish. You know what varnish is, but then you turn it over, it's a different color, and of course any disruption to the terrain is going to certainly in that climate, which is it's very arid. It's the desert, not much rain, if any, and not much wind, and so it's the perfect conditions for preserving these huge long lines. So they're clearly not alien UFO landing strips. Some people thought that they were maybe dealing with deities, right, and some maybe theories about some cosmology, but in the case of the Nazca Indians, we don't have they didn't leave written records about their cosmology. So unlike, for example, in Mesoamerica, we have some idea of the Mayan calendar and their cosmologies. That's not the case with the Nazca. So it's more difficult for us to say, well, here's this hummingbird that they drew out on the plains, and this hummingbird corresponds to this particular deity. So that you're not going to find that sort of one-to-one correlation.
Has what's his name? Graham Hancock. Has he weighed in on von Daniken's ideas? Because wasn't he originally like a big proponent of von Daniken's ideas? Wasn't he really big into ancient aliens for a while? I think he toned it down as he got more popular, and he's really into his ancient civilization, which I think is equally as racist to say that, right. Well, this ancient advanced civilization survived the Younger Dryas and then came out into the world and ingratiating themselves with hunter-gatherers and then taught them
because they couldn't figure that out.
Because, you can't figure out how to fucking sharpen a stick or a rock or draw something without
that's far beyond your abilities.
Yeah, right? I mean, these guys really, really underestimate the human nature or the complexity of what human beings can accomplish with very little.
Yeah, it's a good question. I honestly don't. I haven't followed Hancock in a while just because he's such a crank. I mean, it's like reading Hancock stuff. It's sort of like, have you read much Blavatsky? And she's one of the theosophy and stuff. These phone book thick the cosmologies, and it's sort of like reading Crowley. It's just this like what are you talking about? It's just it's this dense, turgid, impenetrable stuff. And there's a great quote by L. Sprague de Camp, a skeptic and, of course, science fiction writer, who was asked if he was going to try and debunk von Daniken's bullshit. And he said, you can look up the quote, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, even if I was bad enough to do it, it would take years of my life, and who would read it? I mean, and he's exactly right. I mean, that's actually one of the cruxes of the skeptical dilemma, right? Is you have these people cranking out this crank, literally.
Yeah.
And they just have all this speculative bullshit. They throw stuff out there, and they had a dream about something, so they go down that path. And I see this all the time. I see this in Chupacabra research. I see this in ghost research. Just all the New Age cosmology, and they just crank this shit out. And they crank it out faster than skeptics can read it and respond to it and analyze it and debunk it.
Yeah, well, it's because it's easy to make shit up. You know, all you got to do is make shit up and have
exactly
access to the internet.
Exactly.
And that's all you need.
And you don't even need that, man.
And within a month, you'll have like 500,000 followers just buying whatever you're saying, hook, line, and sinker. It's interesting you brought up that a lot of these ideas are old and they're just kind of come back in cycles, because there is a very popular image in New Age communities and in the Chicano Mexicano indigenous community that people call the Hunab Ku, and it's like this white and black. They call it the cosmic butterfly, or you know, it's they say it's a Mayan symbol that represents this ancient Mayan concept of the Hunab Ku. But if you look into either of those things, first of all, the image is not Mayan; it's Mexica. It was turned into a circle, like in the 1980s, I think, by this guy that wrote the Mayan.
That recent, huh?
Yeah. Jose Arguelles was his name. He wrote this book called The Mayan Factor, I think, and he was the first one. He turned it into a circle because he thought it looked like the yin yang.
Oh, I see. So he just imposed his own little spin on this. Okay,
yeah. So
that's legitimate.
The original colors,
not.
Yeah, the original colors were yellow and black. He turned them into black and white because it fit into his narrative.
Right.
He changed it. It was originally a square. He turned it into a circle, and he started calling it, you know, he started saying, well, this represents the ancient Mayan concept of the Hunab Ku. Not even using a Mayan symbol, and not only that, but a distorted, embellished upon Aztec symbol.
What a dick.
Yeah, totally. So he applied this idea of the Hunab Ku to it. But the funny thing about Hunab Ku is actually a linguistic invention that was created by the Spaniards in order to Christianize the Yucatec Mayan.
Interesting.
So what they did is they showed up, this guy, I can't remember his name, but he wrote a dictionary of Yucatec Maya. He was a priest. And his strategy was, well, we're going to find out how the Mayan would say the word one God, like one true God. And the closest expression they would have to it was Hunab Ku. And so he's like, fine. You know, that is now the name of our one Lord and Savior, God, from the Bible.
Right.
So the idea had never existed before. It was totally made up and imposed by the Spaniards. And then it had a fake symbol attached to it by a New Ager. So it's like a lie wrapped in another lie.
Right, and then
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And then repackaged and fucking sold to people, because you'll find it on necklaces, fucking T-shirts. People have tattoos. I see people with this image tattooed all the fucking time.
You got to write,
and it
write an
breaks
article on
my
it, man.
heart. Well, I did a video on it. I'll put a link to the video.
But
it's like
magazines don't do videos, man. You got to write an article. This is really interesting. I love this.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to me because people have built their entire careers, like actual academics and, you know, ethnic studies, whatever, you know, I think they're not exactly, you know, academically, their scholarship is not as rigid as I would like.
Welcome to my world, my friend. Welcome to my world.
So, you know, these guys, these academics write papers about the Hunab Ku and the ancient philosophies of the Maya.
Do they not?
They do, but I think that they've got too much invested already. Like, people have their PhDs based off of repeating this shit. And there's one guy in fucking particular. I want to fucking call him out right now. There's this old school Mayan guy. His name was Domingo Martinez Paredes. He died in the 1980s, I think. He spoke Yucatec Maya. Okay, great. He taught philosophy at UNAM, at the National University in Mexico. He was a rabid pseudo-historian and pseudo-scholar. At the time that he started teaching, he belonged to an organization called the MCRCA, Movimiento Confederado Restaurador de la Cultura de Anáhuac, right? The people that are going to restore the culture of Anáhuac.
Right.
And it was an organization made up entirely of pseudo-historians, New Agers, and just bullshit artists. And this guy was a university professor, And he took that as the opportunity to push their philosophy, their ideology, right?
Interesting.
So he was one of the first guys that really pushed that idea of Hunabku, but he also had all these really fucking crazy ideas that he actually stole. Getting back to your whole thing about how most of this stuff is really old. There was a pseudo-archaeologist named Leplongian, I think was his name. French guy, moved to Mexico, wanted to be a Mesoamericanist. He was a spiritualist. He was, whatever their crazy shit.
What are bringing there to
an occultist,
Right.
And he wrote this book that, God damn it, I can't remember the name of the book. When I post this, I'll put a link to the book. He wrote this book where he claimed all kinds of crazy shit. Like he claimed that Jesus Christ spoke Maya. That
and Aramaic, right?
Yeah,
and
that,
English probably,
and that the last words Jesus spoke on the cross were Yucatec Mayan, and he writes this in his book. And then he took this symbol, not the symbol that Jose Arguelles used, but he took another symbol based on like some Masonic Freemason teachings and said this represents Hunabku.
Interesting.
And it was like, and so anyway, all of these ideas. Oh, and he also said, well, the Mayans came from Atlantis, and that
because of course they did.
Because why wouldn't they? And
Duh.
And all world civilization came from the Maya. That the Maya like took off on boats and spread civilization throughout the world. This is this guy. I think his first name was Augustus, but I know his last name was Leplongian. And I'm probably saying it wrong because I don't speak French.
Oh, fuck him anyway.
Yeah, he's a fucking bullshit artist. Well, anyway, this guy, Domingo Martinez Paredes, stole all of this fucking guy's ideas and put them in his books and said the same shit. In fact, if you look at his books, the symbol that Leplongian uses for Hunabku, he's just straight up jacks it.
Wow.
And says, oh, this is the ancient, And then it's like reading his book and Leplongian's book side by side. It's like, wow, this guy just straight fucking lifted this shit. So even though he spoke Yucatec, and I think that's why people in the academic world, ethnic studies world, are willing to give him a pass.
Sure.
Right? They're like, well, he was a native speaker.
Right.
So why wouldn't he know these things?
Are you a native speaker?
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly.
Okay, then.
But what's funny is I know native speakers of Yucatec,
Right.
so I could pass this stuff by them, and they're like, "Nah, dude, that's bullshit. No." And
this one's way.
It's so far gone.
As they say, it's not even wrong.
Yeah.
It's not even wrong.
It's so bad. It's not even wrong. And people give him a pass, and his bullshit gets repeated to the point where it's still being repeated to this day in schools, at universities, on tattoos, and it's fucking infuriating because when you point out to somebody that this deeply held belief they have is probably based on bullshit, their reaction isn't to be like, oh, really? Well, tell me more. I want to become more educated about this. And
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, and I want to have an informed opinion and then go forward from there. I want to see things from all angles. Those shields fucking come up, and they're like, no, man, fuck you. You're saying this because you're a scientist, because you're part of the problem, because you're an agent, because you're...
This is a distraction.
Yeah, this is a distraction. You're fucking Illuminati, or, you're being paid by the Bilderbergs, or whatever the fuck it is.
Well, what I find bizarre and frankly pathetic about it, and I mean pathetic in its literal sense, is you have these people that they don't know any better and they don't want to know any better.
Yeah, it's the second part that's the motherfucker.
Yeah, that's really the infuriating part is when you do research and you say, look, I've laid it out for you. I've done the groundwork. I've spent months tracking this down, finding original sources. I've laid it out for you. It's all here. You go. I've spent. I'm giving you the result of lots of work, and they're like, yeah, no,
yeah. No, I'm like, no. Believing what I'm gonna.
No.
Okay.
But no. It's like, okay. Well, then what's your source? YouTube.
Yeah, I read it online.
Yeah. And it's like,
yeah. Well, what I love is they won't take scientists' word for it. Like, they're super skeptical about, well, why would I believe a scientist? But, fucking Bob's website .wordpress.org / conspiracy news.
Right.
Like, clearly that guy knows what the fuck he's talking about.
Right. Look at that. He's got a beret on his head. How
he's got an American flag on his website.
Right. It's well, that's the thing. It's just you. And if you think about, I mean, whatever, tattoo, whatever you want to believe is fine. But it's like, people in some cases they construct their lives around these beliefs. I mean, they go on pilgrimages. They indoctrinate their friends. I mean, it's a whole thing. It's money, and it's like, and it's one thing to have like look, if you believe that Bigfoot's out there, whatever, I don't care. I mean, I can tell you why it's probably not, but whatever. But if you spend years of your life, and I've read of people who've spent like tens of thousands of dollars looking for Bigfoot. I mean, like,
serious cash.
Yeah, serious. And I mean, I remember I was at Loch Ness, and I interviewed a guy named Steve Feltham, and he had moved there from London, I think about 10 or 20 years earlier, and he lives in this tiny one-room trailer on the shores of Loch Ness because he thinks he's going to find the monster. And I interviewed the guy, and he, interesting guy, nice guy, and I'm talking to him, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, he's living alone on the shore of this lake in Scotland because he got this idea in his head that Nessie's there. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not. But think of how would his life have been different if he's like, you know what, Nessie's probably there, but I don't want to invest my entire life to wait for it.
Out.
Yeah, it's like, it's like, or the example, I remember I was talking to a guy, this is probably about 6-7 years ago, and he had sent me a book to look at, and normally I'm like, I don't have time for this shit, but it's like, I was like, he came up to me at a conference, he's like, he's one of those people like, hey, I love your stuff, I go, hey, here's my card, can you, I'm like, whatever. So anyway, long story short, he sent me this book manuscript that he was looking at, and he wanted my advice, and I don't have time, but every now and then, if I'll try and reach out to somebody, and try to make an effort to just not be dismissive. So, all right, fine. So send me your book. So I spent maybe an hour or two skimming through the guy's book, and it was this weird. And you've seen this, like, it's a kitchen sink thing where everything is thrown there. It's like, well, let me bring in aliens. Hold on, let me bring in the New Age. Oh, crystals, right? It's all this stuff that is only loosely connected, if at all, and they just lump the shit together. Anyway, so one of the he spent a whole chapter on analyzing Stonehenge. And there's nothing new about this. I mean, people have been looking for a long time, but he had this. He clearly spent months or years working on this theory where because he had diagrams in the book, and he's like, this is how the stones are arranged, and he had clear diagrams and like angles, like the angles here, angles there, and he had all these mathematical equations explaining like ley lines and all these things went, and I looked at it, and I was like, so I called him on the phone. I was like, yeah, I looked at your book. I have some notes. I said, on chapter 4 on Stonehenge, you have all these equations and charts and analysis and what all this means. I said, that the stones have been moved, right? He's like, no. I was like, yeah. If you research the history, they've moved the stone several times. So the current configuration of Stonehenge, the one that you spent months analyzing carefully and talking about how
sorry, bud,
how carefully these angles match up to stars and ley lines, they weren't originally like that. And it was over the phone, so I couldn't see his face.
But you could hear
I was like,
his brain explode.
I was like,
right?
And I was like, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's not how I mean, look it up. I have a National Geographic on it. Look it up. And it was weird because I could almost hear his and he's like, okay, I'll look into it. But I could tell he wasn't going to look into it.
Yeah.
I could tell I knew exactly what that fucker's going to do. He's going to be like, okay, they moved the stones. But they knew.
They knew where to move them.
They knew, right?
That's why they moved them,
right?
man.
They had the stones put this in way, but they knew that in the 1950s and 60s and 70s they were going to move the stones in this particular way. So I was just I just know that's where it's going with it, and so
bad.
Just so much time and effort spent on these, and it's just. And I try to be sympathetic because with background in psychology, and I deal with believers all the time, and I'm a big believer in trying to be respectful, right? I mean, people come up with weird beliefs. They see ghosts. They think they're psychic. They think this and the other. And I try to be like open-minded, like, all right, well, I believe you believe it, and help me understand. So I try to, I'm not one of the, I'm not one of the dismissive ones. But at some point, I'm just like, man, it literally makes me sad to see the amount of lifetime experience that people have pursued in researching and internalizing something that they could have realized has no real basis if they had spent a couple hours.
Well, I know exactly how you feel. I was in Hollywood once, and I went to I don't know if it's still there. Last time I was there, I looked for it, and I didn't see it, but the L. Ron Hubbard Life Museum.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, this is going to be a hoot, right? So I walk in, and the woman at the counter was excited to see me, and she welcomes me, and she calls over somebody to watch the front desk, and she's like, I'm going to give you a personal tour of the life of L. Ron Hubbard. I was like, great.
Awesome.
So we're walking through it, and she knows it, the sales pitch, pat, right? Boom, boom, boom. She's walking you through it.
Did you ask if they have any Kool-Aid? I've always wanted to do that. Just go like, yeah, I love this. Do you have any Kool-Aid I could drink? Just see what they do.
Well, I don't think they would even get it.
Probably not. Anyway.
So, I did the e-meter. She took me into a room and had me do the e-meter. And the tour, quote-unquote tour, is actually a really long sales pitch that's going to end with them trying to get you to sign up for classes or buy books or whatever.
You got to weed out the Thetans, man. You got the evil, but Xenu is all over you.
I thought she was way more interesting than what she was talking about. So I was like, so where are you from? Because she had an accent, and she was from China. And she was telling me the story about how she always wanted to be a dancer since she was a little girl, and finally she made it after years of study and practice. She became a professional dancer. She got into this really prestigious program, and she left it all behind to join Scientology and move to the United States.
Wow.
And work at the L. Ron Hubbard Life Museum.
And she was proud of that, I'm sure.
She was. Well,
she wouldn't have told you the story.
She was, but I could kind of see it in her eye. I wouldn't say she wasn't proud about it, but when she was talking about being a dancer, you could see it in her eyes that it was something like she lit up. You know what I mean? Like, I loved this. And it's like, holy shit. I thought it was going to be like a joke going in there. Instead, I left feeling bummed the fuck out because this woman who was trying to achieve her life ambition got suckered. Mm-hmm. She got taken advantage of. And fucking now she's like a prisoner in a fucking Scientology camp.
Yeah, she's
somewhere.
waiting for people to come in so she can sign them up for e-meters and the chance to meet John Travolta 20 years from now.
Yeah, it was really depressing. But I wanted to bring this up. You are an expert in chupacabras.
I am.
Is that fair to say? You are an expert.
I've literally spent far more time than any other person alive looking into chupa. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, smart or stupid, but it's the truth. Yes.
So I hear that, and I know next to nothing about chupacabras.
I'm not sure that's true, but
so they originated in Puerto Rico. Is that the first reported sightings, or was it in Mexico?
Good question. The the very first report of the Chupacabra, the goat sucker, for those who don't know, was in. And by the way, don't Google that. I made the mistake one time.
I'm just Googling the goat sucker.
Yeah.
Kids, don't.
Just don't do it. It's not worth it. You can't unsee these things. Anyway, so when I was researching it, so basically the very first reporting sighting was in August of 1996.
That recent?
Yes.
Holy shit. It just feels like it's been around a lot longer than that.
It does, and
maybe I'm just really fucking old.
No. Everybody thinks that, and what you find is that people, because it's such a well-known creature, people assume that it must be old, right?
Yeah.
Because why would a well-known creature be young, right? Mothman, Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot. I mean, there's this assumption, there's this sort of legacy that these creatures draw upon, and certainly with like Bigfoot, for example, the main sightings of Bigfoot only date back to the 1950s. If you discount, which you should, sort of earlier, Native American and First Nations myths that were sort of like co-opted. Yeah, exactly. Like and you and I can talk about that at some point, because that's what pisses me off, is when you have people who should know better, who try and co-opt Native legends and stories for their own, like, oh, let's shoehorn this into Bigfoot. Like, no.
Yeah, as evidence.
Yeah.
As additional evidence to what we're trying to...
Exactly. So there's this, so again, Bigfoot really only goes back to the 50s, and the Loch Ness Monster really only goes back to about the 30s. So even those monsters don't really date back before the 1900s. But Chupacabra, again, people assume that it's a much older creature, partly just because they've heard about it. And after my book came out, I did the book, Tracking Chupacabra, and I pretty much nailed down the origin of it. And it's a long story, but basically, there were the Chupacabra is, of course, a vampire because it sucks blood. And that's what intrigued me about the Chupacabra was, Bigfoot's not a vampire. Nessie's not a vampire. The Chupacabra is clearly a vampire. That's his signature, right? And so it was like, okay, well, if this thing is real, then it should be leaving like bloody things everywhere.
Yeah, one would think.
One would think, right? So anyway, so I spent part of the book looking into forensics, right? So I interviewed a medical pathologist at University of New Mexico and talked to her, and she explained, if you kill an animal, if you, for example, if there's a canid predation, right, a dog or coyote attacks something, it'll crush the neck, and it'll leave 2 puncture marks. Sometimes others, but oftentimes 2 right in the neck, and then sometimes it'll just go away because it bit it and it goes away. And so oftentimes people would see these things, and they would find a dead animal that's not been eaten, that is dead for reasons that aren't clear, but with 2 puncture marks in the neck. Well, you're going to think a vampire. But in fact, it's because, after the trachea is crushed, it basically died of internal bleeding and hemorrhaging.
And these were goats?
Yes, goats. Mostly goats, also some chickens, things like that, occasionally cattle, but mostly goats and sheep and things like that. Anyway, so there was a long-standing tradition of vampires, certainly in Europe. And so basically, I argue that the Chupacabra is basically it's a modern version of the European vampire. It's sort of there's the vampires people are familiar with are revenants. They're basically humans that died and then were brought back up. So that's why these days we think of vampires as the Anne Rice vampires or Dracula, Bela Lugosi, whatever else. But there's older vampires which weren't human. And so they don't take a human form because they were never human, unlike the revenants. And so the Chupacabra is that sort of vampire. Another example would be Pazuzu, the demon in The Exorcist, which is actually based on an actual entity.
Is it?
It is.
Oh,
there actually is.
Awesome.
There actually is a Pazuzu.
Captain Howdy.
Yeah, well, I read a really good book on genies and jinn called Legend of the Fire Spirits, written by a friend of mine, Robert Lebling, and he talks about some of these genie legends. Anyway, I'm getting off track. But anyway, so Pazuzu is one of them. Anyway, So in the process of trying to track down the Chupacabra, I discovered that, again, it really dated back to 1995 when there was a movie came out, Species, the science fiction film. And
award-winning science
fiction film, right? And with Natasha Henstridge and Ben Kingsley and Michael Madsen, if I'm not mistaken. And anyway, so what happens is that, as it turns out, again, I'm summarizing a 300-page book in a couple words, but the very first person to ever see Chupacabra was a woman named Madeline Tolentino, and she was from Canóvanas, Puerto Rico. And I went to Puerto Rico and interviewed her, and I was basically the first person in over a decade to interview her, because after her original sighting, it just sort of it made a bunch of news and then sort of faded away, and then I sort of came to it and like,
she needed a good publicist.
Hold on here. I'm skeptical, Sean. Let me look at this.
She could have had a whole cottage industry built off this.
Oh, tell me about it. So I tracked her down, and she was really very nice, and she was now living with her second husband. And she told me the whole story, and she showed me where she saw the Chupacabra and told me the whole story about it. Anyway, it turns out that what she described was almost exactly like the creature in the movie Species, called Syl, with the spiky back and the spikes in the back and the alien type eyes and all this. And so, in interviewing her, I realized that was the connection, because she said that she'd actually seen the movie Species, shortly before she saw the Chupacabra. And when I was writing my book, I had some people who were like, "Yeah, you just they basically accused me of like twisting her words to my theory." Mm-hmm. It's like, oh well,
hypothesis.
Exactly. But here's the thing, right? So sorry, hypothesis. And here's the thing is, so I actually tracked down an interview. Actually, it was the sighting was in '95 and the interview was '96. Where she said that she explicitly says the Chupacabra I saw looked a lot like the creature in the movie Species, and that was like the smoking, because that was somebody who interviewed her a decade earlier. I didn't go back in time. That's what she said. So
she said.
Anyway, my point here is that so I was able to establish that was the first time the Chupacabra ever emerged, and where it was certainly called the Chupacabra. So before that, say in the 90s and 80s, there were legends and stories of something mysterious attacking animals, but there always have been. There's nothing unique about that. That happens in Europe, that happens in Africa, happens in Mesoamerica, everywhere else. But what was unique was that the idea of a Chupacabra, the idea of a goat-sucking creature, blended with this movie monster that was designed by H.R. Giger, the artist who did the movie Alien, right? Exactly, and the Necronomicon and stuff. And he designed the Chupacabra, the creature effects, which then sort of influenced her description. So, long story short, that was the first time that it ever emerged, and so. But after my book came out, it was interesting because it's been pretty well received. Most people have agreed that I solved the case and I pieced it all together, with one exception.
And who is that?
Who is that? It's what is that? And the answer is, this goes back to your first comment, which was that you thought it was older. So I have been gently, well, sometimes politely, sometimes not so politely, told that with all due respect, I may be wrong about everything else, but I'm wrong about the Chupacabra in terms of when it first emerged, because they say, the capital T, they say, well, I heard about the Chupacabra in the 70s in Texas. Or someone told me, well, I grew up in New Mexico in the 1980s, and I heard the Chupacabra. Well, I grew up in New Mexico in the 80s, and I never heard about the Chupacabra, but whatever. So the point is that there were these people that sort of came out of the woodwork, and they weren't like dogging me. They were sincerely saying, like, I remember hearing about the Chupacabra before 1995. And my answer to them is always the same.
It was lost time, alien implanted.
Clearly, yeah. This will shock you, but that was not my response. My response is, that's interesting. Do you have any evidence?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, what do you want? My answer is, well, here's what I would take as evidence that the Chupacabra existed before 95. That I would need a published reference to a Chupacabra anywhere. It could be in a magazine, a book. It could be in a folklore blog, anywhere. Because I can't just take your word for it. Like, well, my grandpa told me. I don't care about your grandpa. I'm sure he's nice. He's doddering old guy in the corner.
Yeah, that's not evidence.
Yeah. He's watching Bonanza. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. So my answer is always, that's interesting. You might be right. And most recently, I've offered.
And if you are right, I'll gladly update
my
information. Right?
No, I've actually offered a reward. I've offered $1,000.
Yeah.
So I've had about 4 or 5 people over the past few years who've contacted me saying, Mr. Radford, I liked your book, but I think you're wrong because I remember Chupacabra, this and that. And my answer is always, that's cool, that's interesting, you might be right. I'll give you $1,000 and I will update my book and I will thank you. Please give me some evidence. And it has to be something. I can't just. It can't be your memory.
Well, see,
it can't
now
be
you're
Grandma
just thinking
said.
like a fucking scientist, and that's not fair to the postmodern
clearly
interpretations of reality.
But that's my truth, man. That's my truth. Don't be messing with my truth.
Still real to me.
Exactly.
Well, you had mentioned that somebody had written something about Chupacabra, that there was a story of a shepherd or a goat herd or something.
So here's the thing. So it's interesting. So in the process of trying to, keep in mind that the Chupacabra only dates back to 95, the 1995 film Species. There is nothing before that, like literally nothing that I found. I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please correct me with actual evidence.
What if I showed you an Ica stone with
that's all I need. No, but no. This goes back to what we were talking about before. Like, I'm being totally sincere. Like, if someone can show me I'm wrong, I will thank you. I will give you money. I'm not going to laugh at you. I'm not going to dismiss you. I will embrace you and thank you for correcting what I said.
Yeah,
sincerely. Like, so it's just this. It's the difference between somebody who is so invested in what they like. Well, it's like, don't confuse me with the facts. Don't give me evidence contrary. Like, no. Please give me evidence that shows me I'm wrong. I want to be right.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to be right. Exactly. And if you're right and I'm wrong, then I will learn from you and I will thank you and I'll correct myself and I'll move forward. So anyway, one of the problems here with an origin date of 1995 is, if you believe in the Chupacabra, as many people do, certainly throughout Latin America and also in Puerto Rico, then the question is, well, hold on. Where was it before 95?
Yeah, right? I mean, did it just spring into existence?
Exactly.
Via von Daniken's alien motherships?
Duh, right? So, but seriously, this is the problem. If you believe that Chupacabra is real, and I know I'm sometimes trilling my R's, sometimes not. I can't help it because
I do the same thing.
Okay, all right. I'm glad I'm not getting shit for that. Then you have to reconcile the fact that there are no pre-1995 sightings. So what has happened is that people have invented pseudo-histories of the Chupacabra. And as a person that debunks pseudo-histories yourself, you will appreciate this. So I wrote an article for Skeptical Inquirer magazine back in 2016, and I sort of examined some of the ways that people have literally invented history for the Chupacabra under the guise of, hey, this is a story. This is real history. So there was one book titled "Enchanted Legends and Lore of New Mexico" by John Ray de Aragon.
I thought it was Ray John de Aragon.
Ray John, sorry about that. Yeah, Ray John de Aragon. Actually, there's no accent. Anyway, we know who I'm talking about. And so I'm reading his book, and I actually met him. We were both doing a book signing at a local bookstore in Old Town, Treasure Chest Books, Treasure House, and Met him, and he is a nice enough guy, kind of. And
I'm not a fan.
Well, anyway, I'll just leave that there. But so I got one of his books, and there was a section on the Chupacabra. I'm like, and he didn't know that I had written a book on the Chupacabra. So I'm like,
tricky.
I'm like, I'll be interested in reading your chapter on the Chupacabra. He's like, okay. And the bookstore owner who knew that I'd written Chapter on the Chupacabra was like, so anyway, so I go back home. I took his book, and in that book he has a story titled "The Sheep Herder and the Chupacabra." And I'm reading his book there, and he tells this story of a curandera who had this is centuries ago, who had basically seen a chupacabra, and she had a sacred heart of Jesus with her, and she was basically casting it out, saying, protect me from the chupacabra.
Hold on, can everybody at home hear my eyes rolling?
Oh, there you go, right? So it's this, so if you're reading this, you don't know any better, and to be clear, he presents this as like a true New Mexico history.
Yeah, undisputed.
Yeah. This is
oral
just
tradition or something.
Yeah.
That was passed down.
And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Let me look at the references. Can you dub in some cricket sounds? Because so I'm like,
There were no citations?
Oh, no references, no citations at all. I'm like, okay, because that's kind of sad, because as a researcher, as somebody who knows something about Chupacabra, I would like to follow up on this. Anyway, so as it turns out, I'm reading this, and it's clearly a Catholic legend. I mean, it's crystal clear. It's, woman sees some demonic thing,
cast it out through the power of Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, this is I mean, there's just no record of it's presented as a New Mexican legend, and well, I don't know how to put this slightly. He's lying.
Yeah,
it's not. It is not. Now I could be wrong. And if he wants to give me the citations, references, I'll be happy to retract and fix this. But to the best of my knowledge, and I've done a lot of research on this, he made this up.
Well, he's also one of these cats that pushes the whole, New Mexicans are Spanish bullshit. He pushes like the whole narrative that, well, in northern New Mexico they speak an ancient form of Castilian, like that bullshit, which has been thoroughly debunked by linguists. The whole idea that anything bad said about the Spaniards is part of the black legend.
Yeah.
So I call these guys like the modern Holocaust deniers, basically, because they deny this genocide that happened here. And I'm getting off track, but I really don't like this guy is what I'm getting at. And the fact that he just straight up lied in this fucking book of his does not surprise me in the least. But to pick something like this to lie about, like, how does he even associate it with the Chupacabra? Did they use that word specifically or explicitly?
Well, that's a good question. I actually have a quote right here. It says the Dona Serafina, the old curandera, kept finding dead cattle, dead chickens, dead sheep, etc. And she says, since whatever it was mostly attacked goats, she said, a goat sucker, the people call the mysterious animal Chupacabra.
Okay, so then there should be a record of that.
Oh yeah, so I mean, this is a direct quote from what he said. So absolutely, there should be many. I mean, yeah. So according to him.
People started calling it.
They did.
Yeah. So, I mean, somebody must have written this down. Surely something of this magnitude would have warranted a newspaper story or mention in somebody's memoir or something. Somewhere, yeah. And so, if it is indeed a legend of New Mexico, as he calls it. Which I've never heard.
It's one fabricated by him in 2012 for his book. With no truth or historical provenance, that's basically a brand new story being recycled and passed off as an actual legend. And as a folklorist, that pisses me off.
I bet.
I'm not a professional folklorist, but I do folklore, and I'm a member of the American Folklore Society, and I spend a lot of time researching folklore. And you don't do that. If you folklorists, like actual folklorists, are very careful not to inject their own stories, and basically they're contaminating, they're poisoning the well, they're contaminating the narratives. I mean, you don't create new stories and legends and call them actual authentic legends. I mean, this is one thing that frustrates me about this particular. I'm not trying to just bag on this guy, but that's what I find frustrating is that actual folklorists are very careful. They're very careful to cite their references. You quote people directly, and they because you want to make sure you retain their voice and their inflections. I mean, there's a whole process that he's seemingly unaware of when he just sort of like, oh, here's a story I made up, and oh, it's a New Mexico legend.
Well, you have to assume that people that are interested are going to be like, well, where did this come from? I mean, whenever somebody brings anything to me that sounds a little fishy, or even if it doesn't sound fishy, I'm always like, oh, that's really cool. What are your sources? Do you have any citations for that?
Right.
Do you have stuff that I can look at with my own eyes instead of taking your word for it? Because even though I might like you as a person, I don't know where you're getting this information from.
Right.
And there's some people who think that way, right? And then there's other people that are like, well, whatever.
Right.
It's whatever goes.
Well, no, but here's my concern here. It's like again, I don't really care if you want to do this. If you want to tell stories, that's great. I love stories. You love stories. Nothing wrong with stories, but don't pass them off as fact. Don't pass them off as authentic legends, because what's going to happen, I guarantee you, is that at some point next year or 5 years from now, someone is going to quote this guy.
Yeah, someone's going to reference this fucking book.
Yeah. And they're going to say, well, Radford's wrong because this guy Ray John de Aragon in his book Enchanted Legends, he says X, and Radford doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, no.
Yeah.
No.
And if you're not willing to take the time yourself to look into it, because most people, shit, man, what I'm finding is most people don't even read beyond the headlines anymore. That's this Facebook sharing culture that we've built where they'll read the headline and then comment on it or share it without reading the article. And a lot of times, the shit that they're sharing or the stuff that they're saying about the article, you could tell they haven't read it because they're contradicting what's in the article just to promote their own personal narratives. I don't know if you're aware of this new, I don't know how new it is, but there's like a new conspiracy. Okay, one, I don't want to call them conspiracy theories. I want skeptics across the board to stop calling them conspiracy theories. I call them conspiracy fetishes and conspiracy fetishist because one, it's a misuse of the word theory, which I hate as a scientist. It just gets on my nerves, and it grants it this level of legitimacy by saying, well, it's a theory, you know, it's a conspiracy theory. No, these people fetishize conspiracies.
It's not a theory in any sense of the word.
It's not a theory. They're not even hypotheses. Like they don't even reach that level.
Right.
But there's a new level of conspiracy fetishism going around amongst Afrocentrists. And it blows my mind because the conspiracy is that the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, never happened. And this is...
Hold on. Let me think about that for a second. So, how does one even...
I don't know. But it was birthed from this idea of these black identity cults in the South that and the East Coast that claim that African Americans are actually Native Americans, that the Olmecs were black, that all African American descent people are actually Native Americans, and that the slave trade idea, the myth of the slave trade, was invented to hide this historical fact.
Wow.
And that
what
we call Native Americans who, came Beringian, hypotheses, they came down.
Sure.
That those people, and I include myself amongst those people, were latecomers who encountered the African American they call themselves Aboriginals.
Aboriginal Americans?
Yes. And they call us Mongoloid pink Indians and wannabe Indians. Yeah, it's this crazy,
is bizarre, man. I've never heard this
fetish, and it's born out of like Noble Drew Ali and all these black identity movements, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, where these guys started claiming that well, the actual black man is the Native American. And so they lay claim to like the mound builders of Cahokia. They lay claim to the Mayan civilizations. They lay claim to, and it's funny because it even goes back to that guy, Domingo Martinez Paredes, that I was bringing up, where he claims that the Mayans went out and spread civilization all over the world. They claim that African Americans, or the Aboriginal Americans, they call themselves.
Because they wouldn't be African Americans.
Yeah, because they wouldn't be African Americans, are the ones that spread civilization all over the world.
Is anybody buying this shit?
Unfortunately, yes. And I'm seeing a lot of it online, and it's crazy because I get hate mail, I get hate messages. I've been saving them. I've been taking screenshots of all these messages, just really ugly, gross things, and I'm just going to compile them. I don't know what I'm going to do with them yet.
You should read them, man. Just
read them off over the air.
Yeah, dude, do it. Just like you take a grab bag. You're just like, all right, and this is from this guy. Okay, Mister Pinkule Mongoloid boy.
Yeah, and that's what they say. And
wow,
it's wild because to hear this subset of the African American community coming out and saying, no, the transatlantic slave trade is a myth, is just mind-blowing. I don't know how this was birthed or why they're propagating this, who's benefiting from it, in what way, but you should look into it.
It's so like it's not even wrong. I mean, it's just
it's so bad. It's not even worth. But I've been thinking about writing about it, so maybe I'll kick that to you guys. You have expertise and knowledge and writing skills that need to be put to better use. Oh, thank you. Other than the university.
Wow. I've been to the university, man.
Well, man, it's been great having you. Good conversation. I'm glad that you made it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, man. Are
there any? You have a podcast, right?
I got a podcast. Yeah, sure. I do a podcast called Squaring the Strange, and we've been doing it for about 9 months now. So I have a co-host, Pascual Romero. He's from Santa Fe. We do a weekly show on any number of weird things and skeptical, critical thinking on everything from lake monsters to social media issues. I got a book coming out in a couple months called Investigating Ghosts, which is my 11th book, I think. It's sort of a compilation of basically ghost investigations. I did a book in 2010 called Scientific Paranormal Investigation, which sort of covered how to investigate X, whether it's psychics or Bigfoot or whatever else. And I touch on ghosts, but really ghost hunting is such its own category. There's so many different interesting angles to it, ghost photos, EVP, voices, that sort of thing, that I realized that it really needed its own treatment. And so it's as far as I know, it's the very first book to sort of take a good critical, skeptical look at the history of ghost hunting and how to do it right and bring science to it. So I'm doing that, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and doing stuff and keeping busy and the usual.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Atlantis, a project of the Chimali Institute of Mesoamerican Arts. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. You can do this by visiting talesfromatlantis.com and clicking Support the Podcast. Your continued support will help keep the podcast ad-free and independent. Until next time, Timo Itase.